Thank you. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on Is English Proficiency Necessary as an Outcome of Our Education System? To help us answer this, we have two outstanding private sector individuals, Tan Sri Yong Pokon, Chairman of Royal Selangor International, and importantly, an education thought leader as a member of the National Education Advisory Council, and also Afzal Abdul Rahim, Commander-in-Chief, as we call him, of time.com. I'll start first with you, Tan Sri. Let's just dive straight into it. Japan, China, and South Korea have become industrialized countries without having the English language at their core of its education system. So is English proficiency really necessary as an objective for our Malaysian education system?
Well, let's put it this way. The countries that you mentioned, whether it's Japan, Korea, or Germany, for example, they have a very big body of knowledge, whether in the technical field, scientific field, and the economy is so much bigger that really their exports and imports as a percentage of their GDP is actually a small percentage. In Malaysia's case, we are one of the few countries in the world where our import-export is more than GDP. In fact, among Asia, Hong Kong, Singapore, they're 200% external trade to GDP. And we used to be number 3, Malaysia, 160%. But now we've been overtaken by Vietnam. So whenever you have external trade bigger than your domestic GDP, you need to engage with the world. And what else to engage but with an international language? Just take ASEAN, one of our largest trading partner, ASEAN. All the 10 countries. Now, apart from Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, colonies of Americans and the British, we speak English. The other 7, the Thai, the Cambodians, Laos, Myanmar, their language is not so much. Maybe Myanmar, their English is not too bad, But they have chosen a common language, English, to do all the trading and all the agreements. And talk about agreements, we just signed the RCEP with Japan, Korea, and of course with our southern neighbors, Australia, New Zealand. All these trade agreements are in English. You want to do trading, let's engage. Only that, the Siemens, the Nestle's, the Hondas of the world, their corporate international language is also English. So why do we move away from that? This English proficiency is so important. I just want to share some numbers with you, if I can. In 2015, we were looking at this question of English. Is it better for, shall we say, teaching in science and maths and all this? Because we are phasing out. But the important point to notice is that the knowledge that is happening in the world is exploding in exponential terms. And when we did that lab to persuade the government to at least find some ways to teach more subjects in English, we just took, for example, the search results in Google. Now, if you look at it from this point of view, just take 3 words: diabetes, cancer, horsepower. We showed these numbers. There are 262 million pages for diabetes, 500 million for cancer, and so many million, 33 for horsepower. And we Compare that with in Bahasa. Kencing manis, we have 0.9 of a million. Cancer, 5 million. So what we are saying is there's 200 million pages of knowledge on the internet compared to 1 million. And likewise, 500 versus 5. So all these are indicators that knowledge is exploding. We are talking about Industry 4.0. We are talking about digitalization. All this must happen in this world. We must face it. The English language is the biggest. And this was one of the convincing things for the government then at that time, to start the DLP, the dual language program, to teach maths and science back in English, but on an optional and opt-in basis. And I think that's a key. Parents must be able to choose and decide whether they want their kids to be in this position or not. Now, you mentioned about the National Education Advisory Council. We finished our term in 2020 last year. And out of interest, another development happened. I took the same search. Kencing manis went from 1 million to 11 million pages. I said, wow, that's very good. You know, we have 10 million increase in the number of pages. Cancer, another 25 million increase. So all these are good things. But when I clicked on to the same words in English, another 500 million pages are available in English. Here for cancer, you have 1,200 million increase versus 25 million increase. You know, I thought horsepower will be more because with electric vehicles, people will search more, you know, but still it's the doubling. And it is something which is far more than what we have in Bahasa. Bahasa is a good language for us, but if we want to be realistic, we need the knowledge for us. And by the way, nowadays, there's no more Encyclopedia Britannica. Everybody looking for knowledge has to go through the internet, and the main 60% of all searches on the internet are in English. So that's very important. So you also ask, you know, in this case, even after they graduate, they look for employment. I just want to show a very quick chart on the workforce. We have 15 million people. The government employs 1.6, but the another 90% is from the private sector. And there was once a group of HR personnel, CEOs got together from chemical, from the financial services, etc. We asked them, how important is English in your workplace? 100% of them for the first 4, 91% for the next 80%. Maybe in public services, 88% not so important. But whatever it is, you know, we asked, do you test for them before they join your company? Again, overwhelming percentage of them do. So I can say to our graduates, to our students, to our parents, English is very, very important for a country like Malaysia if we are to go forward. You know, this is my immediate rejoinder to you. Thanks, Mali.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Afzal, for you, we saw that slide on whether is English important in your workplace. Were you one of the 100% that said yes?
Well, yes and no. We have call centers where people have to be fluent in Malay, Tamil, and Mandarin as well. So we wouldn't be in the 100% category, right? Because we have to understand that our customer base has to cater to all facets of society. I think English is critical. I don't disagree with anything that Tan Sri says. Although what I would say is that I think there are several reasons how we got here, and maybe we'll talk about that later, and I won't take on your role as moderator, Male. Why English is important as a business person is purely the ability to communicate with the outside world. That's what it boils down to. But however, we also have investments in Vietnam and Thailand, where we have thriving companies who also are in the same business as us, in the telecommunications business, who do absolutely fine in Thai and Vietnamese. The difference is that Malaysia has built our reputation on being an English literate country. And, you know, foreign investment has come to our shores, and our affiliations, et cetera, have been built over the past, 50, 60 years because of the fact, not primarily, but partially because of the fact that we're an English literate country. The investments have gone to Thailand and Vietnam for different reasons, or maybe similar, but they've taken that into account. So when there is unpredictability in policy, right, and because education is such a wonderful thing to politicize and a great tool in the run-up to elections and post-elections and mid-elections, etc., we don't have predictability with respect to what people can expect. So if we had decided, and I personally would think it's a wrong decision, that we are going to drop English entirely and we are going to be a Bahasa dominant country, again, I wouldn't agree with it, but then do it and stick to it. Because then at least we will understand what our interactions with the outside world will be. We will be, we will lose our position as a logistics entreport country. We will lose all of that kind of stuff. But at least we know what to expect. Today, this back and forth of, the teaching of English goes back to 1971. The Wawasan schools and the attempt at bringing English went back to Tun Mahathir's first tenure in the 1990s, and then the back and forth ever since then. I've lost count. I think, Tan Sri, you probably sat on 33 dozen committees over the years, and I applaud you for your perseverance in being patient. I would have jumped off a building probably, right now if I was you.
Yeah. Thanks, Afzal. I think, you're right. I think what you're saying is basically consistency in policy, right? Going forward. And actually, it's interesting. I think there was an attempt to do this with the Malaysia Education Blueprint, which was released in 2013. And
Correct.
Interestingly, the English proficiency was actually baked into the targets of the Malaysia Education Blueprint. So there is a recognition that English was going to be important. And I think for all the reasons that you said, Afzal, because we position ourselves as that, and as our trade is dependent on that, and 60% of global trade is in English. Tan Sri, can you just walk through what the targets were in the Malaysia Education Blueprint? I mean, this was done by government itself, right?
Yes, I think it's important for us to walk through that, and like what Afzal said, it may appear that we are lurching from yes and no and yes and no and yes. To a certain extent, that's true. But what Malik said in 2012, 2013, 2014, they published this education blueprint. It's a fantastic, very thick document, but well researched and well presented. And the government actually realized the importance of English, and they put in certain aspirations, certain targets for us, targets which we have set in that blueprint. So we cannot say that now we are reversing. There are two things here. It is one thing to reverse. The other thing is to set a target, but we are not working towards it. And in the process of not working towards it, we try to give an impression that, well, maybe we should not be having that or something of the sort. I think it's very important to show it. And I must do this if I can share this particular screen. All right. Okay. This is extracted from the blueprint. And the examination syndicate measured at that time, I think it's 2010, that the Bumiputra community have a 23% of the candidates achieving at least a credit in English Cambridge 1119 paper. I'm not sure how many people are aware of this. When we sit for our SPM, we sit for SPM Standard Malaysia
322, right?
Yeah, and at the same time, they have another set of marking system to comply with the Cambridge 1119s, the O levels in England, right? So they say that, okay, we are only 23%. We want to have 70% by the year 2025. Within the 10, 15 years, they want to go up to 70%. So this is not lurching to and fro. It is actually the setting of a target more than 10 years ago that in another 4 years' time, we should reach 70% credit passes from at that time, 22%, 42%, 35%. And the average of all this turned out to be 28%, okay? So from a 28%, they want to target 70%. And this is very important because it is in the blueprint, And I'm afraid if people do not have this in their consciousness, it may become lost in space. So think of it, 70% credit passes, because it's got a lot of ramifications for us. And you can see, we 2 weeks ago, we had, I think BFM had somebody from Padu, Khatijah from Padu, and she alerted us that they've just announced a report, September 2021, that go to this website and get it, that these were the passing rates. For last year, they got 80%. Previous year, also 80%, 79%. So it appears that it is okay. We're getting a pass rate of 80%. And the aspiration, to have human capital that's fluent in English, to raise our marketability dalam peringkat global, in the global arena. Now, these are the expectations, are very good expectations that we have, repeated by Padu. And so that must be the expectation that Malaysians must hang on to. Okay?
But what you're saying, Tan Sri, is that what you're coming to is basically that there's some, you're not happy, you think these numbers do not represent the actual number, because the same exam papers, the same answers, when marked on an international by external examiners, yielded a different result, right?
Correct.
Yes, that's right.
Correct. But Malik and Tan Sri, if I may, Tan Sri,
Mm.
would you mind going back to the previous slide, right? And this is what I find interesting, if you don't mind. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, these are the results of those that sat for the 1119 paper at Form 5, right?
No, these are the people who sat for the normal paper, and then another marking system for the 1119. Yes. By the same person, done by the same person.
Correct.
Scored by the same person. Yeah.
Correct. But the point is that not everyone sat for the 1119 paper. Is that correct? Or it was the same paper? Okay. So from what I understand from this, I may get this wrong, is that this represents the results of students who sat for the 1119 paper, or whose papers were marked for 1119. But in order to hit the 70%, and this is what you mean by the target is there, but one can be, and I hate to use this word, disingenuous or convenient in looking at it, is that if I wanted to improve the results on this, I would discourage the number of students sitting for 1119 to only those who are proficient and will get a credit. I'll get my 70%. So this is the issue across the world with governments and government targets. We set the targets, but when you look at it granularly, if I had 100 Malaysian kids who were sitting for these exams, and I was getting only 28 of them getting credits, then what I'll do is that I'll only let the top 40 sit for it, and 70% will be achieved.
Yeah.
So
this is the issue with targets and granularity, right, Malik?
Okay.
So we're not even there. I guess, Afzal, I think that's a second level of sophistication.
Yes.
That you're going on about basically gaming the system, right?
Yes.
But even the first, what I call it, the first level of sophistication, I think, is this ingenuity happens also in the marking system. Essentially, what we're saying is that our SPM English, I think Tan Sri will flash up the next slide.
Yeah.
Which says that our on the same paper, what happens is that we say we got 80% pass rate. The same papers are marked by external examiners say we actually have a 50% failure rate. I think that's the
good
problem.
Summary here, because whilst here it says 80% pass rate, it means 20% fail, right? 80% pass, 20% fail, and the same grading here, the 20% who fail actually is 50% who fail. When you bring this 20% is the SPM results who have failed, right? But we put it across the 1119. If you want the international level, it is a 50% failure rate. So if you have the aspiration to compete on a global stage, we must try to have a global standard for our English. And if that is the case, then that will be the standard that we just set. And not always coming back to, actually it's only 20% who fail. That is the main thing that we must bring about. Yeah. And because we have already targeted a 70% credit pass, you see. So if you're not achieving it, we must find ways and means why we cannot achieve it.
Malik, but if I may, I
Unfortunately.
just want to say, if I understand this slide properly, not to get pernickety and all geeky on this, right? What we're saying is that based on our SPM levels, and I don't know if the paper is still called 322 or not, but during our time it was called 322, right? If it is still called that, based on our standards and our marking standards, the Malaysian syllabus, then you would have that 20% failure rate. But if you took the same paper and marked it at an O-level standard, then we would have a 50% failure rate. So it's quite different from saying that. So what we're talking is about standards as opposed to anything else, which is slightly different than the pre-conversation that we had, right, Malik?
That's right.
Yeah.
It's a different way of presenting the numbers, right? To give a good impression, of course, you present that it's only 20% who fail. But if your aspiration is to have your Malaysian students to have that global marketability, as we said in this particular line, that you want to have human capital that is able to have greater marketability on the peringkat global, then we must find a standard which is global. This, I think it is important for us to come back to global standards for this reason. This does not apply only to English, by the way. You all have heard about the TIMSS and the PISA tests, where they rank 13-year-old for mathematics and science. The same thing happens that in our PMR test, we got 30% of our students in the PMR got distinction. But in the same TIMSS, the international grading system, is only 2%. Likewise for science, we got 17% distinction, but in the TIMSS is only 3%. So I think Malaysia, we have to step back from what we call standards which are not in consonance with the international standards. Let us look at international standards and we benchmark against those. Otherwise, we will just continue to feel that, hey, we are doing okay, but we are not doing so okay. So I think that is the main message that I like to say as far as international standards is concerned. Because it's not only that, it leads to this. The next point is say they really want to raise the proficiency in English to again follow an international standard, which is the CEFR. CEFR is the Common European Framework of Reference. In Europe, they have many, many languages, and they have always a problem to try to rank and standardize the standard of each language. So they came up with this CEFR. And Malaysia has also adopted CEFR. They adopted it in the Education Blueprint. And again, there was a roadmap for us. And I think we're going to spend a couple of minutes on this because it is important, it's tied to these international standards. This CFR actually have 5 grades or 6 grades. And you start with A1, A2, you can communicate basic English. Then A2, within a limited range, you can do it. And this is what we call the primary school students. We call it a basic user. Then you go on to communicate on essential points and ideas with familiar context. And then you could use English effectively with some fluency in the range of context, B1, B2. And then we are talking about SPM, Form 5 level. Then, of course, C1 is English teachers, and a certain level you can become an English teacher in the Ministry of Education. Need to have C1. But at this moment, we need more publicity on this because we are really going to adopt it. And from what I know, at the moment, our primary school students, about half, 55%, are still in A1. But what is more nervous is this. It will mean that 60% of our Form 5 students are still at primary school level. And these are the standards we have adopted. It's the international standards. So we must be aware that there's lots of work to do. And this does not apply only to schools. It applies also to the next level as they go in towards the university. Because the Malaysian University entrance test is band 1, band 2, band 3. A lot of courses at band 3, you need to get band 3 to get in. There are also some courses which you need band 2. So unless we find a step up in university to bring it up, you'll find that many are in this level. And this is where I think we need some attention to be placed. It's nothing to do with the universities because their input are the products from the schools. So we really need to put some attention on this particular topic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Afzal, I'm not sure if you're still doing entry-level interviews. I do it sometimes because I'm curious about.
No, they don't let me because it scares off the candidates.
You scare them off, do you?
I scared off the candidates, that's right. Yeah.
Gina, you can take off the slide for now.
Okay.
Just but I mean, what is your sense of the kind of like as our graduates come from universities online? What's your sense of the level of English? Are they basic, reasonable or fluent?
So let's talk about trending rather than absolute level and relativity,
Sure.
right? The general level of English found amongst graduates during the interview and hiring process over the past 5 to 10 years has been deteriorating, not improving. Okay, so let's just be clear. However, to be fair, on balance, and maybe I won't be popular for saying this, the ability to navigate information out there in this, to quote Tan Sri, in this online Encyclopedia Britannica, because it's no longer paper books, is improving significantly. So just because someone, I just want to provide a balanced view, Amale, I hope you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure.
Just because someone isn't fluent in English, and again, I think it's extremely important, doesn't mean that they are unable to navigate in English. But it means that critically, their ability to think critically happens in their mother tongue. That's the key thing. So they could be slightly slower, but they're still able to get information and portray information in a very good manner. Let me give you an example. We have many TAR college graduates working with us. We just happen to have, we're proud to have a large group of TAR college graduates working with us. We actually have a large group of UITM graduates working with us as well, right? The kind of polar opposites is a very polarizing statement, but you know what I mean? They're quite different in where they come from. And the TAR college graduates, basically, a lot of them came from the vernacular school system. So they're fluent in Mandarin. They probably popped out in Standard 6 and started Form 1 in national schools or some other schools. Very few went up to is it still called Senior Middle 3? I don't even know what it's called, but very few went up to that level of qualification. And what we find is that because of their numerical ability, they are very good at analyzing numbers. But if you can live with the grammatical errors, right, then actually the insight is great. The same can be said of the UITM grads who are predominantly Malay, just to bring this race into it for a second, but who are taught in English at university, just to be clear, right? What you find is that they're able to navigate the communications better, but you find that because generally speaking, the level of mathematical literacy in the vernacular school, in particular the Chinese school system, because it doesn't apply to the Tamil school system, is higher, right? That basically they can communicate better, but they're not as good at analysis and not as quick as analysis. So it's interesting to look at. You need to look at it from a composite standpoint. One is the ability to communicate in a language. Second is the ability to learn in a language. Of course, they're linked. I'm not saying that they are linked. But because necessity is the mother of invention, people have learned to get around their shyness or their self-consciousness to speak in a particular language, but they're happy to explore the world via the internet in that language, in this case, English. Right? So I would answer the question that way. It's generally deteriorating. The level of conversational English, the level of presentation-based skills is deteriorating, right? However, it doesn't necessarily mean that people are getting worse at their jobs, at least within our little group. However, let's be very, very clear on this. I think it will come to a point where there will be a decoupling of where we think we are as a country, as I mentioned in the very beginning, versus where we actually are. And I don't think we're far from it. Now, if I've said this before, and I come from a family of educators and teachers and lecturers and professors. Most of my family have done that across generations. I was too lazy, so I became an engineer. But what I wanted to say is that fundamentally, if we start looking at fluency of language, right, the fluency must start from the point of view of the educator. Now, we cannot expect, Tansi, correct me if I'm wrong, we have more than 500,000 teachers in this country,
Yeah.
right?
400 over 1,000.
400
Sorry,
something thousand, yes.
400 plus thousand, yeah.
Right. So we have close to 500,000 educators in this country. It is simply unrealistic to expect that if the 400,000 teachers in this country would perform at par or even lower than the 70% aspirational rate, right? They didn't perform slightly or even higher, that they would be able to instruct their students to get to that level. And we have to be fair to them, because it's not our teachers that don't want to teach in English, or not that they didn't want to be fluent in English or fluent enough to teach. So not to flash up Tantri's slide, but if you look at the highest level, it was upside down. I think the highest level was a C2 level. The ability
Yeah,
to
upside
teach,
down. Yeah, upside down.
the ability to teach, etc., etc. We can't blame our teachers, because we've let them down through this path since 1971. If I get my number, if I get my dates right.
Yeah.
So it was a 1971 Minister Sulaiman decision that brought us to where we are here today.
Not Sulaiman, it's Rahman Yaakob in
Rahman
1960.
Yaakob, thank you.
In 69, after the May riots, I still remember, because it's burned in my head. 69 May was the riots. In June, July, at the on TV, black and white TV, I remember he came out to announce from next year, 1970, we will phase off English medium schools. But there's English medium, right? But this other point, of course, of a declining standard, it is true. I mean, you've noticed it yourself.
Yeah. Tan Sri, I mean, you and I are from different generations, right? And I think the majority of Malaysian population, from a generational perspective, is not represented on today's session, right? But to be clear, they care less and less about our history and how we got here. But the millennials, and let's just call them the millennials because it's a nice word to use, are far more interested in solving the problem. The problem that we have, Malay, is that why does English become a political tool, or English in schools become a political tool? Because there are various hidden agendas beneath that we don't talk about. We don't talk about it.
Let's talk about it now.
Well, we don't talk enough about the vernacular school lobbying agenda. We don't talk about the religious school lobbying agenda. And what ends up, because we want to appease a certain portion of the electorate or otherwise, or we feel that we can continue to elicit votes by thinking in a particular way, right? Then we don't talk openly about what the right outcome should be, and we make compromise decisions. Let's be clear. Those who feel that their their children should be eligible for a wholesome Islamic education, right, will never allow for the Islamic school system to be integrated into the national school system, or for standards to be changed. The proponents of the Mandarin school system, I would fair to say, over their dead body, they're going to allow for any changes, because they are protecting, again, what they believe is the right means to educate their children. And English, sadly, gets caught in the crossfire of this. But we don't talk enough about it.
Yeah, precisely that. You remember they're called a PPSMI, the Maths and Science in English, and which had to terminate in 2016 because of all this forced teaching. The vernacular schools didn't like it. The national schools didn't like it. Right. So in 2015, then the solution was to have this dual language program, whereby maths and science could be taught in English. And at a later stage, they call it a DLP plus, dual language plus, where certain other subjects could also be done. And the important thing now is it must be left to the choice of the parents. I think Afzal is right. You cannot have a uniform system whereby the vernacular, the national, and everybody takes the same basis. But if you provide that choice, where you allow those schools who are able to do it, the parents want it, then this additional emphasis on English to bring you up to that 70% and more. We even discussed some of the boarding schools, the Sekolah Berasama Penuh. They all should be ideal candidates for this. I want to show, for example, the MRSM, the Mara Junior Science Colleges, their English proficiency is top because they do IGCSE as one of the options. So I agree with you. Cannot force the vernacular skills. You have the religious schools will have a real uproar. It must be a what we call an optional basis.
I think
at least, that we can do that.
Tansi, just to correct my position so it's clear, I think personally, if I was in charge, I would shut down all vernacular and religious schools and have a national school system who medium of English is as important as the national language Bahasa. I believe Bahasa is critical. There's no debate in my mind about Bahasa, right? Because Bahasa is a unity issue. But if I could and turn around history, I would knock our founding fathers on the head and remind them and show them the future. If I had a Back to the Future machine, I'll get into my DeLorean and tell them, are you being idiotic? All you're doing is creating polarization by guaranteeing these constitutional reforms. And the problem is that we've allowed one problem to get to another. It was about privileges and lands and authority and recognition. The counterparty said, no, I want to preserve our culture. And it just took off from there. And we've been defending suboptimally, spin-off, right, poor decisions all along the way. Right. I mean, there is no place. I mean, some of the questions coming to the chat box, as I can see, perhaps only the three of us can see, have to do with what about Japan and Germany? These are mono-ethnic societies. They're monocultural societies. We are not a mono-ethnic, monocultural, mono-religious society. We are multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural society. And as a result, we have a basic problem with unity. So there are two challenges to the English language. One, and the teaching of English in Malaysia. First of all is that we are unable to unearth the hidden agendas amongst the lobby group. So what you hear people saying is not necessarily, you think why they're saying it in a particular way, but they've already got a concerted agenda in the background. And we've seen this across the years, right, from different lobbying groups. Secondly, so English is again caught in the crossfire, as I said. Secondly, it becomes a unity issue. It becomes a unity issue because we are unable to communicate with each other well enough in a single language. Right? So you can argue that whilst Pancasila is liberal, you don't go to Indonesia, we've used it so many times, but everyone is happy conversing in Bahasa Indonesia, regardless of their ethnicity. Now, of course, they had to almost disguise their ethnic identity for the minorities and take on local names and traditional names because that's what was kind of enforced on them. But the problem with English is the poor English proficiency today and the horrible, not even suboptimal, but compromised decisions that we are making is because of the fact that we have several factors, including those of national unity in a multi-ethnic, multi-religious way, and our politics is built that way. That's why we're here. Our forefathers, the generations that came before us, got it wrong.
Afzal,
I think sorry,
we will. So it's interesting. Next week's seminar actually is on exactly this point, and maybe we should ask you to come again. It's about unity, achieving unity in education, unity and equity in education. But let's leave that for next week. That's what we're going to come to. But this is a thing. This is a question from Chaco. There is a perception if we push proficiency in English, it would mean a deterioration in proficiency in Bahasa Malaysia, right, or Bahasa Melayu. What's your point of view on this, Tan Sri? Is it at the expense? Will it be at the expense of Malay?
No, it will not, because let's put it this way. We have a situation whereby there is a general feeling that English in our national schools cannot be more than Malay. I agree with Afzal. Malay is important as a national language, but in the same slide that I showed, of talking about the credit passes from 20% to 70% for what we call English. There's also a target for Malay from, I think, 80% to 90% credit passes. Now, to meet 80% credit passes is already quite a very high standard in terms of passing. And you have the timing every week. There's about 51 periods in a primary school. English is about 6 or 7 periods. Malay is about 7 or 8 periods. But they forget that the balance of the 40 over periods is in Malay, in Bahasa. So what we are saying is that if we were to increase some of the hours of the periods in English, and the amount of diminution of those few periods that we give to the English, you already have a lot of the other subjects which are in Bahasa.
So you're talking about national schools. You're not talking about Chinese schools, for example.
No, national schools first. National schools.
But the issue with the issue with Malay literacy, if I may, doesn't exist among sekolah kebangsaan students or sekolah or sekolah agama students. It exists amongst the vernacular schools.
So we leave the vernacular schools aside because it's a separate topic. But I'm talking of the.
I know, but they form a large part of the population, right? I mean, let's be clear.
Yes. So if you just look at the national schools by itself, I think what Chako mentioned about diminishing or loss of proficiency in the Malay language will not be there, because if you increase the amount of English spent, you will still have the best of both worlds. Let's put it this way. To get the proficiency that we need, even the blueprint, they said they need to go beyond the present 11 to 15% in the English language. You need to go beyond that. This is why, because of immersive training, so that you are able to be able to click together and it builds upon itself. But until you reach that threshold, you cannot do it. And what you mentioned about 400,000, it is not 400,000 in English. Actually, there's only about 30,000
English teachers.
Yes. But unfortunately, what you say is also true. Only half of them, 53%, achieve the C1 level. So we have a lot of work to try to bring the rest of the 15,000 to the C1 level. So we have to do it. No matter 1 year, 2 years, let's do it. But we have to recognize to do it. But as far as the vernacular schools is concerned, now you talk about unity, and next week they can talk about it. Surprisingly now, the national schools have become so monoracial that the vernacular schools, the Chinese schools, have become almost 20% non-Chinese. They are the most mixed schools of all. So we need to find a way to.
Yeah, I know, Tansi, but here's the point. I mean, you and I have sparred on this before. You know, I look at you with deep respect, and you're someone that I look up to as a mentor. But the fact is that you belong to the camp of people who believe that vernacular schools should be preserved. So you're not neutral, Tansi, right? I mean, let's be clear. Right, I belong to the camp, and I'm declaring it that I believe that vernacular schools should be shut down. So we're coming from two different ends, but I'm declaring that fact now. But there's also a sense of false filtering. Let's be clear, because the students going into national schools are predominantly Malay, right, and because they speak Malay at home, of course, the levels of Malay literacy are unlikely to be affected. Now, the 20% composition, which I think is fantastic, by the way, of children going into Chinese schools, right, etc., of non-Chinese students going into Chinese schools, just talk about it on racial lines, happens because of unhappiness with the education levels in the national schools. That's why that's basically happening. But it doesn't solve the issue of communicative fluency on a unity level, because they go to school separately. So when we talk about these issues, we need to look at them granularly. There is this funneling happens at a Tadika Taska level, Malay. It doesn't happen in standard one. It happens at a Tadika Taska level, right? Etc. etc. Let's be very clear, you know. And people are choosing about whether or not I send my kids to a Tadika or a Taska. The streaming happens there, and I think we kind of forget this. On the other hand, when we look at the vernacular schools versus the national schools, right, we cannot solve this problem until we have a single school system. We can't, because forever we're going to feed this monster, and people are not going to be able to communicate with each other in the national language because of the, as Tan Sri says, the mono-ethnic composition of these schools.
Tan Sri, one response from you, and then I'd like to go to the questions.
Okay. Well, one quick response is this. I think fundamentally in the final analysis, as enunciated in the National Education Act, 1995, in the preamble, it is very clear that we have the national schools, we have the vernacular schools, and in the final analysis, the preamble says education should be provided as far as possible according to the wishes of the parents. So if you're going to bet into that, and we're talking of national unity, then we must examine why over the years the national schools has become more and more monoracial. And then even the Chinese schools have become more multiracial. So in other words, if it's going to be a choice, we cannot say shut down everything and have only one system. It is far, far better to find ways and means to make the national system more attractive, that over a period of years, if people want to go to national schools or vernacular schools, you have the level of Bahasa Malaysia for everybody, but you also have the level of English proficiency that we think we need and we aspire to on a global stage, and achieve all those rather than, one size fits all. Okay, I'll pass it to Malik now to go.
Okay, thank you. I guess it is a contentious issue. I think though forcing the closure, for example, of vernacular schools where we haven't fixed the national schools, I think it's a fool's errand. I think we really need to, and this is what we're talking about. How do we improve the quality of the national education system so that with open arms, parents will be saying, you know what, between this vernacular school and between this national school, I'd rather go for a national school because it builds up a national unity and multiculturalism. Sorry?
Why should we be entitled to a choice, right? The right to education
we have
enshrined in our constitution. Correct.
Your choice to basically opt for the better education. If the quality of education in national school is better, then that.
But if we have a unity problem, because this is a unity problem. Sorry, I'm just going to take my stand here, and I don't think it's going to be very popular. If we have a unity problem, why should people and why should parents be given a choice? Today there is a choice between public and private education. For those of us who are fortunate enough to afford a private education, that's almost become the default choice, and that's very, very bad, because over time it just creates a bigger chasm, right? I mean, we know about that. But if unity is indeed the problem, why should we have a choice? Why can't we be honest with ourselves and say that our founding fathers made an error? They should not have allowed for different streams of systems, because I would put it to you that if we continued with a national school system, right? Tan Sri is the one who educated me that it was only after the lingua franca was changed in schools, or the medium was changed, from English to Malay in 1970 or 1969, as he said, that the enrollment in Chinese schools picked up, right?
I'll show you this chart.
Yeah. Which you educated on me on before. This one, yeah, right. This is the one.
I think as far you touch it now. If we go to the statistics in those days, from 1947 to 1967, this was the last statistics that I got before the 1969 problem, right? You see that the Tamil medium schools, 1947, we had already 4 streams, right? Tamil schools, English schools, Chinese schools, and the Malay schools, Malay medium. You see, even the Chinese medium, they were coming down, If we had continued beyond 69, the English medium schools, they would have really overtaken, they would really have overtaken all the other schools if they've gone beyond 1969. And I think, and what is the result of that? In those days, this size of the bar pie charts are approximately equal to the numbers in those schools. The Malay schools, of course, is all Malay. Chinese schools, all Chinese. And Tamil medium, all Tamil Indians. It was the English medium schools in 1967 which were the most ethnically balanced: Malay, Chinese, Indian, others. And in those days, I'm sure there are a lot of listeners here, who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s. Those who went to this type of schooling, they were really in a position whereby race did not matter. We were interfacing among ourselves, and there was no problem at all. But of course, after 1969, well, the what we call the
fracture happened.
The problem happens. So if you want to find some ways of integration, it cannot be a 1 year, 2 year thing. It's going to be a 5, 20, 30 year thing. But we start away.
But as a country, Tan Sri, so I think you and I are saying different things, but from a different generational lens.
Okay.
My point is that we've tried for 60 over years. It hasn't worked. on a unity level, right? And the problem is that we equate English with English schools and we equate Malay with Malay schools. The language that you are fluent in is predominantly what you speak at home. What you speak at home is based upon where you come from and where your parents were educated.
Yes.
So as a Generation Xer who was born in the late 1970s, I belong to the last generation who had parents who were educated in English. The rest of us were educated in Malay or Chinese, or in a very small proportion Tamil, or in some cases even Arabic and Jawi, right? So let's be clear about that. I think, Mali, in order to we cannot address English. I think we all agree that English is important, right, and it's critical, right? But we cannot address this issue without first accepting. I don't know why it's so difficult. Why is it so difficult to say that our founding fathers erred and we need a change of course? And until we have the change of course to have a single school system, and I know what you mean, you can't do it overnight, right? But until we have a plan to do this, we tried half-heartedly with the Wawasan schools. I think it was 1994, 95, was it, Tantri? Something like that. And, you know, the various lobby groups, Dong Jong and all these guys, and, you know, all shot it down because they couldn't imagine, oh my God, I can't have my children mixing in the same school with others. They will lose their identity. You know, that
I don't think it was a question of mixing that they were objecting to.
I know, but that was what was
it is the language
electorate, right? I mean,
Okay.
But I mean, yeah. So sorry. So the point is that I think we're only treating the symptoms.
Okay. I have some questions here, and two of them are quite, I guess, on the same lines. Basically, if we both kind of like spoke about English, let's put the unity issues aside, but just let's focus on the English side for now. Fedora Zulkifli said it's interesting that we're still trying to justify the importance of English. What resources do we have to support our teachers, right, our educators, to deliver the English standards required? This also ties in with the question from Shanaz, which is, will it be enough to just get English teachers to attain paper qualification? What about school culture? And this is quite disturbing for me. For example, where teachers or students speaking English would be made fun of or be an outcast. I'm surprised
it's not institutionalized discrimination. It's cultural and peer discrimination. Apa sah hang pandai sangat nak speaking tapi cakap Melayu ke?
Okay.
You know, I went to a school that was 97% Chinese. And during lunchtime, it was a very, very difficult time for me because everyone was speaking in Cantonese. So I would sit there and eat lunch by myself. And I mean, just to be clear, my classmates were my childhood friends. They were not trying to be racist. They were just comfortable speaking in Cantonese. So I don't think it's an institutionalized thing. In fact, I just took my 12-year-old for a vaccination in SMK Putrajaya Precinct 8, which is a Sekolah Bistari, on Tuesday. And I was so pleasantly surprised to see that the majority of the signboards were all in English. So I don't think that's the case. I think it's, again, cultural context in terms of being made.
And Tan Sri, what about, what resources are we putting? I think we spoke about this a little bit in previous webinars for teachers to sort of be able to step up and as you say, there's only 30,000, 40,000 teachers that are English teachers, and then of them, 50% are sort of I guess has the right qualification, so to speak. What are the resources out there?
Yes, you see the blueprint actually have listed out a few strategies to make sure that the English teachers are brought up to the C1 level. And I think the resources needed are not that big that you cannot overcome it, because we are talking about the balance of the 15,000, at least for these English teachers. But I think you need to have the ministry organized in such a way that the emphasis is there. For example, now a lot is left to what we call the English Language Teaching Center, the ELTC. It is not even a division. It's like a small department. It is, I think, important, and the Education Advisory Council did recommend that it should be upgraded to a full-fledged bahagian, because English is such an important part of our education system. Whether it is to involve more subjects, whether you have more teachers, but it is that focus that is needed and the sort of accountability that's needed. Because with that, then all the targets that have been set in the blueprint, at least somebody or some department is feeling the heat. Like in a time.com, you will assign some department to be responsible for certain things, or any company will do certain things. they will be given that they must, shall we say, meet the targets as set up in the blueprint, and to give reports every year, on the real numbers that has been achieved and what steps that they need to continue to do this. Because other than that, it is like difficult to pin down who is really going to be responsible for doing this. It's a huge ministry, the Ministry of Education.
Yep.
Okay. I think there's also a question from, and I think I can answer this on your behalf. A question from Sean: will international schools create an elitist mindset? To a certain extent, yes. You do definitely have inequality. I think you certainly have. And it certainly doesn't bring the cause of unity together. Any thoughts on that? Any thoughts about international schools?
I think before it creates an elitist mindset, which unfortunately it does, it creates a detached mindset.
Detached.
Right. Right. So I think detached, whether it's elitist or superior, that can be debated, most probably. But more importantly, it creates a detached mindset. Right. I travel from my gated community to the school and back, and that's even more scary than being elitist.
Got it. Okay. And I think there's so I just want to come back to this. It's interesting. You picked up on something which was very interesting, Afzal. You said that, hey, amongst your your recruits, right? Your folks coming from the TAR, right? And they're much more numbers driven. It's like more analytical in terms of spreadsheets and numbers and so on. Whereas folks from Mara tend to be a little bit more on the communication side, a little bit more on the, tend to communicate better and things like that. So what you're saying is, in a way, more creative, right? So is this a product because of the cultural differences of the institutions they come from, or is it? Do you think it goes even below that, because some of them from TAR, they generally tend to come from Chinese language schools, and UIT tend to come from.
I mean, so look, I think it's been proven. I'm a great advocate of the abacus, right? I think it's been proven that, for example, the usage of an abacus is phenomenal for the development of neuroplasticity in young children. Tan Sri, I'm sure you would agree with me on this, right? I think that the usage of an abacus as a manual calculator should be made mandatory across all students in Malaysia, regardless of what school system they're in. But when you look through the Chinese school system, one thing the Chinese school system does extremely well, right, is the rote learning aspects of education at an early stage, particularly rote learning. And people look down on rote learning, I don't, and particularly rote learning to do with numeracy and numbers and numerical literacy. So when that basis is formed, one can do calculations in their head, and mental arithmetic becomes easier. So when you do mental arithmetic and you were forced to use an abacus, and there's a balancing factor in using an abacus, obviously, then what happens is that when you look into doing a spreadsheet, right, then actually you can cross-check yourself. Hey, this doesn't look right. So the ability to say this doesn't look right, or let me look at it from a different angle, is training. And of course, once you have strong mental arithmetic skills, what happens is that you move on to a tertiary education in something that's also numerically based, and that even solidifies it. However, what happens is that a lot of these people then get focused in the granular aspects of stuff, whereas those that they perhaps weren't so numerically literate, but had to study and become numerically literate, or doing accountancy or finance, etc., were forced to trust the spreadsheet. But because, and I'm simplifying and stereotyping, so please forgive me here, but because they were forced to trust the spreadsheet, because they didn't have the ability to go and check it for themselves.
Used to it.
Correct. No, the rest of their brain could interpret the spreadsheet.
I see.
So that's the way that I look at it in simple terms.
Okay. Well, in very simple terms, why I think the Chinese are quick in their maths is because the mental arithmetic is monosyllabic. 3 times 6 is 18. It's just monosyllabic, and you get it out. Whereas in other languages, there's many syllables to it.
99 in French, right? I mean, yeah. And you know what the French are like.
Okay, great. Great. I think, Afzal, I just wanted to go one more area before we really conclude here. I mean, you're an employer, and this is open to you also, Tan Sri. What skills? I mean, a lot of what skills are you looking for? What attributes are you looking for in graduates of today? Just to kind of like we're going beyond language now. We talked about it a lot. Right. What are you looking for?
Okay, so three things. Number one is critical thinking, right? So critical thinking means that I'm able to look at a problem, I'm able to provide you with the data to the problem, and I would like you to figure out how we're going to get to a solution. You don't have to have the right answer, but I want to see that you can basically draw the lines or connect the dots insofar from the issue to the issue, the issue to the solution. Excuse me. One is critical thinking. The second thing, which is in very, very short supply, and I think it's because of all these damn millennials, right, is actually street smartness. Right, this literally street smartness, not looking for intellectual smarts, looking for street smartness. So the guy that can go to one of our dealers who's selling consumer broadband and figure out why is it that 3 out of 10 people are walking away, but the other guy, 7 out of 10 people are walking away. And you have to have a level of street smartness to basically do that. The third thing, and this is very, I know this may sound very, very strange, is we're looking for people who are comfortable in their own skin. Because we find that people who are comfortable in their own skin means that they're a little bit more assured. Doesn't have to do with confidence, very different. Okay, so confidence and outwardness and extrovertness is one thing. You can have people who are comfortable in their own skin who are basically introverts. But we find that people who are comfortable in their own skin are then able to have, generally speaking, a better foundation for them to excel in the workplace. So these are the three things.
Yeah. Tan Sri?
Well, the ability to look at a problem, analyze it, come up with a solution is one part. The other part, which you may not get the same, but you every now and then you get those who is also got a creative bent to whatever they're doing. So often we have problems which you may look in pure technical terms, but suddenly you need to add in that creative flair to completely transform the problem into a product or a service which is actually not seen before or has got this unusual or special formula or special characteristic that really defines the product for that period or for that time.
Fantastic. All right. On that note, thank you very much, Tan Sri, and thank you very much, Afzal, for your contributions today. We have a really lively debate on the status of vernacular schools, how to achieve unity, and that brings it very well for next week because it's about exactly that. Achieving unity and equity in our education system, where we'll have Jason Wee, Dipti Kumar, and Dr. O.A. Sun to talk about that. Afzal, you're very welcome to join for a second time to understand, at least as part of a very vocal audience.
That pressure won't be able to take it.
Okay. With that, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for attending this. And look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same place, Thursday, 6 p.m. Next week, this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Malik. Thank you, Tan Sri.
Okay.
Thank you, Tan Sri.
Thanks,
Thank you, Afzal.
Thanks, Malik. See you.